When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little while longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love." So we are continuing our series, What Now 101, and as you may remember, this is kind of a series focused on the basics of the Christian faith. One of the things that happened often in the early church is that the period of 50 days, the great days of joy between Easter and Pentecost were used oftentimes to bring up new Christians in the faith, to help them understand the basics of the faith, to teach them the basics of the faith. And so that's what we are doing during these 50 days of Easter together. And so we have talked about believing in Christ. We've talked about what it means as to live our lives as a witness to Christ. We've talked about what it means to follow Christ and reviewed the conversation that Peter had with Jesus when Peter said to him, "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, I love you." "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, I love you." "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, I love you." "Then feed my lambs. Feed my lambs." And we were invited to follow as well, to follow Christ and feed Christ's lambs as well. And then last week, Pastor Maria talked to us about what it meant to discern God's will for our lives. What does it mean to look for God's message to us as individuals? And how are we called to live out our lives as followers of Jesus Christ? How do we discern that? Today we have a short passage, a big message, and the message is this: love one another, love one another, love one another. Did you get that? Or if you're a text messenger, it's easy. LOA, LOA, LOA. Not LOL. LOA. Love one another. Love one another. Today's passage is the beginning of what is often referred to in the Gospel of John as the farewell discourse. It's Jesus taking the time to teach the disciples and to prepare them for what life is going to be like after he's gone. And the 13th chapter begins with Jesus washing the disciples' feet, showing the disciples by his own actions what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ, to be in service to others, to empty himself and take the form of a servant and to wash his own disciples' feet. We are called to love like that. And friends, here's the question though. Jesus comes to us today and in today's passage of Scripture and says to us, "I have come to offer you a new commandment, that you love one another." Well, loving one another doesn't sound like anything new, does it? We have heard this before. The disciples had heard this before. It was something that as good Jews they knew a lot about. They were called and as Jews to love one another. So what's this new thing about? Why does Jesus refer to this as a new commandment? What's new about it? What's new about it? Well, I think what's new about it is if you read it, Jesus says, "Friends, I have come to offer you a new commandment." And then he says to love one another. But then the next sentence says, "Just as I have loved you." That's what's new about this. Jesus says to us that I've come to offer you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. That's what's new about all this. What's new is to do it like Jesus did for us. Kind of reminds me of a story that that I read about recently. Some of you may know about the website Humans of New York. Well, Humans of New York was started by a guy named Brandon Stanton. Brandon Stanton in 2010 was a young man who lost his job and was trying to think, what am I going to do? I lost my job. And so he was an amateur photographer. And so what he decided to do, he decided to move to New York City and to begin to take photos. In fact, he set a goal for himself to take 10,000 photos, or photos of 10,000 people in the city of New York, to take 10,000 photos of people in their natural New York habitats, if you will. And so he did that. He went to New York, he moved to New York, and he started taking photos. And along the way, he decided that one of the things he might want to do to add interest to the photos is to begin to be in conversation with the people whose photos he took. And so he decided he would enter into conversation with them by basically asking them two questions. And the two questions were, what's the greatest challenge that you have ever faced? And then secondly, what advice would you give me? And so he took lots of photos. He began to have those conversations, and he did not quite fully understand the significance of those conversations until he took a photo one day of an older woman who, and the picture that he has of her is a picture of her in kind of a furry hat, and her wisp of gray hair are sticking out from under the hat. She has glasses on and has some mascara under her eyes, and there's a blue umbrella that's kind of in a fuzzy part of the picture in the background. Well, that's this woman, and under her story, or under her photo, is her story. And in her story, he shares the story that this woman's husband was dying, and so she asked her husband. She said, "Mo, how am I supposed to live without you? How am I supposed to live without you?" Well, this was Mo's response. Mo said, "Take the love that you have for me and spread it around. Take the love that you have for me and spread it around." Friends, I wonder if what she was saying about life without Mo is what Jesus was saying about life without Jesus in the flesh. What Jesus was doing with the disciples was preparing them for life without him. And what Jesus said to them in this exchange, this very short passage, this short passage with a big message is, love one another as I have loved you. Pour out your love on others in the same way that I have poured out my love on you. As you have experienced my love for you, share that with somebody else. And in that way, others will begin to know who I am because of your love shared with them along the way. Love one another as I have loved you. Love one another as I have loved you. That means love your male person. That means love your neighbor. That means love the grocery store cashier. It means love the barista when you pick up your coffee tomorrow morning. 11 words. I have given you a new commandment, that you love one another. And then Jesus adds 5 more words which turn this statement upside down. Just as it depends on what version you read. Just as I have loved you. I guess that's 6 in the New Revised Standard Version. Love one another just as I have loved you. And friends, that is something that where Jesus kind of turns things upside down, and we are called to love everybody that we come in contact with along life's way. And friends, I will tell you that is a difficult thing to do. It's a difficult thing to do because there are folks that come, I don't know about you, but there are folks that come across my way from time to time that I find difficult to love. And some of those are in my own family. There are situations, I don't know if you've experienced this in your own family, but there are people in our own families that we probably would not choose to have as our friends. I mean, we're just talking one-on-one, personal right here. There are people in our own family sometimes that we might not choose to have our friends, but we find difficult to love. And yet what Christ is saying to us is love one another, even those that are difficult to love, as I have loved you. And so that means our neighbor and our spouse and also those folks that we find difficult to love. And folks, some folks are harder to love than others. I'll admit it. We all will admit it if we're really honest with each other. Some folks are harder to love than others. And yet, what Jesus is saying is that if we, as followers of Jesus Christ, want to keep his message alive in the world, then we are called to love one another as he has loved us. And as Paul said in our Acts passage, who are we? I mean, not Paul, but Peter said in the Acts passage, who are we to hinder God? Peter was talking about sharing the gospel message with the Jews and had a vision where he was reminded that the gospel message was not just for the Jews, but was also for the Gentiles. And I wonder if also what that means for us is that we are called to share the gospel message, not just with those that we love and not just with those that we like, but also with those that sometimes we find difficult to like and to love. If we share Christ's love in that way, we will never run out of love to share. I like the story of Courtney Allen. Courtney Allen is the pastor of the Grace Baptist Church in Richmond, Virginia. And at Grace Baptist Church in Richmond, Virginia, it is very near the airport in Richmond, Virginia. And one day as she was leaving the church, she had a conversation with the custodian who was also leaving the church about the same time. And apparently the custodian lived very close to the airport. In fact, had several neighbors who were TSA employees. And she tells the story of him having this conversation with her custodian during the time when the federal government was closed down in January. You remember for several weeks, TSA employees were working even though they were not getting paid. And so her custodian just wondered with her, a kind of a concern with her about, what life was like for those TSA employees. I'm really concerned about my neighbors who are TSA employees who are working and not getting paid. And so kind of prompted Courtney to begin to think about, what can we as a church, as followers of Jesus Christ, do to show our support for these TSA workers. And so she did a little research and found out what the rules were in terms of gifts to federal employees and all of this. And what they decided to do is she took them an offering the next Sunday, and they raised $1,500, and she decided to go out and purchase 150 Starbucks cards. $10 Starbucks cards, 150 $10 Starbucks cards. And so the next morning, with her $1,500 in hand, she went to a Starbucks close by, and the transaction to purchase all those cards and explain to the people there, they don't normally keep 150 cards there, just out on and all that. So it took about 45 minutes to complete the transaction. And while she's completing the transaction, there are people coming through the Starbucks there in Richmond, Virginia, who discover what she is doing. She's purchasing Starbucks cards to say to the TSA employees, thank you for what you're doing. And so what happens is kind of spontaneously there in the Starbucks is the people in the Starbucks begin to purchase the coffee for the person behind them, or purchase the coffee for the person who is waiting in the line out at the drive-thru. And in a wonderful way, the love of Christ begins to be shared by this everyday, easy thing that this church decided to do, to say thank you to the TSA employees. And it kind of reminds me of something that we did as a church several weeks ago. You may remember the random acts of kindness cards that we had out on out at the ministry center. The random acts of kindness cards that were in English and in Spanish, and we invited you to take those cards and from time to time to just do a random act of kindness, to do something for somebody that was unexpected, to do it in a way that didn't expect anything in return, and then just to kind of leave that card as a sign or a symbol that you had done that and that you were a follower of Christ as a part of First United Methodist Church, Pasadena. Well, some of you may know Lily Zamorano. Lily attends our 9:45 worship service, and I heard this week what Lily chose to do with those random acts of kindness. What you have in the photo is a crocheted heart, and tied to the heart, or I guess crocheted to the heart, is a little card that says, "In honor of Conrada Leal." And let me just share. I asked Maria to seek Lily out and just ask her to kind of write down what she decided to do and why she did it and all that. And so I'd just like to share this with you because I think it's a beautiful story about loving others as Christ has loved us. So this is her email that was shared with Maria. She says, "I'm so glad that you're interested in the hearts. I have been making these hearts and leaving them in random places for several years. When our church started the Random Acts of Kindness project, I thought it would be perfect to attach our cards to the hearts and leave those as well. In fact, some of you may discover some hearts on your cars out in the parking lot. I leave them everywhere, attached to bike racks, on fences, at grocery stores, nursing homes, churches, even funeral home parking lots. I was led to start this based on the idea of agape. Agape is Christ-like love. Through my experience at the Walk to Emmaus, I learned that the love God gives us without need for reciprocation is perfect and full. In my encounter with Emmaus, I was showered with agape love by complete strangers from many walks of faith, simply taking time to create beautiful messages of faith, hope, and love. This past year, I started a special project to make 100 of them in honor of my grandmother, Conrada Leal, who would have turned 100 on June 4th, 2019. My goal was to give all 100 out in her honor. It was my grandmother's love and patience many years ago that first sparked my interest in crochet. A few years ago, I learned to crochet after making all the Afghans and shawls that I could stand for a while, and prayer shawls too, and I decided to use my talent for some other purpose. I decided to try something small that might spread a little agape for someone else. Through my crochet, I've been able to reach many folks. What a beautiful story. But friends, you know, sometimes love is harder than that. Sometimes love is harder than that. Last Sunday was Mother's Day. And I know that there were some of you here last Sunday who shared with me afterwards that Mother's Day is always a hard day for you because your mother is no longer with you. Some of the others of you shared that Mother's Day is difficult because you didn't have the relationship with your mother that perhaps you wanted, that maybe you didn't receive from your mother the love that you had hoped for. And sometimes love is difficult to share because sometimes we have not been loved in the way that we had hoped to be loved. Or sometimes love is hard to come by because we encounter people that just are difficult to love, difficult to like, difficult to be kind to because sometimes they are not kind to us. And we encounter those people in all kinds of places. We encounter those people as co-workers. We encounter those people in our community. We encounter those people sometimes in our own families. And sometimes we even encounter those folks in church. A number of folks have encountered those people and having conversations about politics where you discover that you're in a totally different place than they are. And you find that pain and that anger welling up within you, and it makes it difficult for you to love and care for someone else. In your Grow, Pray, and Study guide, there is a quote from Henry Nouwen that I'd like to direct your attention to. It's down at the very bottom of the Thoughts for Reflection. Let me share it with you because I think it makes a lot of sense for those of us who are struggling to love sometimes in the way of Christ when we find ourselves in a difficult spot. Henry Nouwen says, if we wait for a feeling of love before loving, we may never learn to love well. Mostly we know the loving thing to do. When we do love, even if others are not able to respond with love, we will discover that our feelings catch up with our acts. Friends, this is a short passage, but it does have a big message. And the message for all of us is to love one another as Christ has loved us, to live our lives as Jesus lived, to love when love is difficult, to take the love that Christ has for us and to pour it out on others, to do for others in ways that are unexpected, to do with others in ways that are unconditional, to love as Christ has loved us. I've had a conversation with a number of you and even shared with you during preaching sometimes that I have had conversations with people outside of here who discover that I'm a United Methodist pastor, and then they ask the question, which often comes after that, which is, well, where are you the pastor? And I tell them at First United Methodist Church on Fairmont Parkway, and they say, well, which church is that? And I say, it's down near Strawberry, and they say, oh, the Copper Top Church. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had about the Copper Top Church. We are known as the Copper Top Church on Fairmont Parkway down near Strawberry. But wouldn't it be wonderful? Wouldn't it be wonderful if someday, instead of being known as the Copper Top Church, wouldn't it be known if we were the church that loved God and loved others in profound ways? Wouldn't that be wonderful if somehow as we lived out our faith in Jesus Christ, we were so intent on sharing Christ's love for others as Christ has loved us, that we became known as the church that loved others, loved God and loved others in profound ways. Friends, I pray that someday that will be so.